everyone, welcome to the September 23rd edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Milkowski, and we're looking ahead to Saturday's card at Parx, their featured day of the fall season, which of course features the Grade 1 Pennsylvania Derby, really the last Grade 1 restricted to 3-year-olds, and we've got a pretty competitive field signed on. Lacks epicenter, but I think that's created an opportunity for a lot of these other 3-year-olds to shoot for a Grade 1 victory. Also on this card is the Grade 1 Cotillion, similar situation for the 3-year-old fillies. Nest in absence, but we've got plenty of other top 3-year-old fillies vying for that valuable Grade 1 black type in the Cotillion. Craig and I did some videos on those that you can also find on the DRF YouTube channel, but on this podcast, we are going to handicap the Filly Big 5 sequence, Parx's jackpot version of the Pick 5 that will be a mandatory payout on Saturday's card, so it's going to play like a normal Pick 5 sequence. That's basically why we're going to discuss it. And Craig, this runs from races 9 through 13, 4 of the graded stakes events, including a Pennsylvania bred stakes in the last. The Cotillion and the Parx, the Pennsylvania Derby, they are wide open enough, but the first 2 legs of the sequence definitely don't make it easy on the handicapper.
I'll say I always look forward to this card. I have a soft spot because of the Pennsylvania Derby. I actually went live to see Broad Brush the year he won the race, and that was the year where he bolted on the turn, went from first to last, and then came back to win in first. And he was my favorite horse and still is my favorite horse of all time. So I just always have a soft spot. I used to go to this race every chance I got when I lived in the area, so I love doing this card. But I totally agree with you on this sequence. This one is not for the faint of heart, and it starts out in the Grade 3 Turf Monster, and it is a monster. This is one where I just really don't have a whole lot of idea where to go. I can start out before we even dig into the handicap. It's one I'm going to be spreading because it is as baffling a race as I can remember handicapping at the stakes level in a long, long time.
Yeah, we start out with a couple of full fields in the graded stakes events, races 9 and 10, the Turf Monster, which Craig was just previewing, and the Gallant Bob, the second leg of this sequence. We're going to start out by talking about these, and like Craig was saying, these are spread races. I mean, kudos to you if you have an idea on a horse that you really love in one of these spots, but it seems like the kind of double that begins the sequence that you just want to basically survive and get through with hopefully some clever ideas, and then get ahead to your stronger opinions that I think you could have in the Cotillion and Pennsylvania Derby, because the form in those races is a little bit more established. You just have a lot of horses in these first 2 legs that haven't done a whole lot of running at the level or haven't run against each other that much, so a lot of guesswork to be done here, Craig. Let's begin with that Grade 3 Turf Monster in race 9 that kicks off this sequence. 5 furlongs on the Parx turf course, and it's a fairly weak race for a Grade 3 event, I would say. I just kind of wonder where a lot of the turf sprinters are that you typically see in a race like this. Maybe they all ran at Kentucky Downs over the past few weeks with the big purses that they offer there, but it seems like a missed opportunity for some New York-based runners not to target this race, because the horse that's the favorite on the morning line, the number 1, That's Right, who is a real threat to wire this field, he was just beaten in a listed stakes race in New York by some horses that are in absence here that I would have thought would be pretty tough here, but That's Right, breaking from the inside, Craig. I think you know the game plan with him. He's just going to blast off to the front.
Yeah, I was baffled by the field here as well. It's one where I saw him, I was kind of going in numerical order, saw he was just a 3-year-old, has never run a 110 TimeformUS speed figure, and started, kind of rubbing my hands together going, all right, this is an easy favorite to toss. And then I started looking at the rest of the field and was like, where is everyone? I have no idea. I would imagine a lot of the 5 furlong specialists probably regret going to Kentucky Downs because that's not really a good place for them. And as you say, this race turned up pretty. I would say easy. I agree more with your term, weak for the class. I do think there is a good amount of speed signed on, so I'm not really interested in that morning line favorite. That's Right. We know what his game plan is, but that's probably going to be the game plan of some others. And for me, it's just hard to imagine him getting a really clean, open lead from that inside position and being able to hold on. So I'm going to look in some different directions.
Well, Craig, I've actually got a question about That's Right, because I initially was looking at this pace projector and thinking, oh, this is a tough position for this horse breaking from the rail with the speed, but the two horses that are shown alongside him on the pace projector, the 5, Uncle Ernie, and the number 9, Breezy Gus, they're both dirt horses. And I know we've talked about this sometimes, that the speed of dirt horses can be a little bit overestimated by the pace projector when they switch over to the turf. I don't think it's some guarantee that those horses are going to have their dirt speed on the grass. And when I look through the rest of the field, among those with turf form, nobody has the early speed of That's Right. So I'm not going to be surprised when he's able to open up 2 lengths on this field like he normally does.
It's possible. I do think Uncle Ernie is really fast, and I think the only way he's not up there is if he just doesn't handle the turf. Now, that is a distinct possibility. It's not like the trainer, John Service, is really good moving horses to the turf. I don't have a formulator stat, but I just looked at the Timeform US rating, and his first time on the turf is like an 8, which is a rating you almost never see one that low. So it's obviously not going to be good if I look it up, but he is pretty quick, and I just have a hard time imagining for $300,000 that at least a few of these sprinters, even if they can't run with him in the first quarter mile, that they're not going to go after him shortly after. I just can't see him personally cruising to the top of the lane with a 2-length lead.
Yeah, it's possible. Like you said, John Service does not have strong numbers with any kind of statistic you look at on the turf. He's really more of a dirt trainer, speaking of the trainer of Uncle Ernie. And it's really not a turf pedigree for Uncle Ernie, especially on the dam side. The sire Talent Search has had some success with his turf progeny. Most notably, Talent Search is the sire of that infamous horse that won this race at over 100 to 1 last year, Hollywood Talent, and was subsequently disqualified for a drug positive. So, I mean, I guess there is some turf pedigree on the top side for Uncle Ernie. I don't know. This is a horse that has dirt speed figures that could get bet off them with Joel Rosario aboard. He's just not the kind of horse for me in a race like this. And, Craig, I'll talk up one long shot that I'm going to give a tentative push to, but when I'm talking about the horses that I really think have a chance in this race, I found it tough to get past That's Right, the number 1, and the number 4, Nothing Better, who just seems like a pretty logical horse in here. He's faced some better horses on the turf recently, particularly last time in that Red Bank at Monmouth. That was going longer, but he's been proficient sprinting in the past, and to me, it just seems like those two stand out on turf form, and I had trouble getting too creative in here.
I have no problem with Nothing Better. I do have a little concern that his last speed figure from us, that 118 at Monmouth, might be a little inflated from the Red Bank due to the really fast pace. We have all the fractions coded in red, and we do try to break those out at times and do an adjustment for pace. I don't remember the specifics of that one, but those two, the top 2 in that race, looked pretty fast, but then the other 2 tailed off, so maybe that's why. But even so, he's still a strong contender for me. He's obviously done well sprinting, so I've got no problems with him. I'll mention a couple price horses that I am going to want to use in here as well. The first one would be Boats A Rockin', the 7 horse. He's a horse who has just done nothing but route lately. And in doing so, he always goes right to the front. Literally every single time opens up a big lead. But if you scroll through his past performances, he's actually done pretty well when he sprints. It's only been 3 times in his career. He's able to rate a little bit off the lead, more of a pace presser than a speed type horse. And I think he's pretty dangerous in here on the turnback. I'm not always a huge fan of turnbacks to all the way to 5 furlongs, but this is one where this horse is just so fast. I don't think it's going to be a big problem for him. The other one I wanted to take a look at was the horse just to his outside, the 8-horse War Toxin. And he's a horse who has done most of his running on dirt. He's a horse who has had some success, though he just does not win very often. He's 3 for 43. So I wouldn't blame anyone who said maybe he's more of a used in the underneath positions. But in Timeform US, you can scroll through the lifetime PPs really easily and see. And he's actually run a couple times on turf. And while they weren't great, they weren't terrible either. And they fit right in with his dirt races. So he's one that I just think might be a surprise. And he's one that will be coming from off the pace for sure.
Yeah, I gave a look to Boat Sorokin, kind of thinking along the same lines that you did, but I don't know. Those prior turf sprints were in $10,000 conditioned claiming races at Penn National. I have trouble reading too much into that form in this race, although he has improved a lot since then. I worry a little bit about that horse sprinting with his, kind of the one-dimensional front-running style. I was more interested in War Toxin when I said that I was thinking about one bomb in this race. It would be him because, like you were saying, I mean, his prior turf races, they weren't terrible, but they came at a time when he was not in the kind of form that he is now. He's improved since then. I do worry that his recent dirt form is tailing off a little bit. So I wonder if they're just kind of switching back to turf a little bit out of desperation. His last race was kind of a weird set of optics because he was kind of choppy out of the gate. It looked like he wasn't warmed up to run or something. I mean, it's not like the jockey was not asking him for any run. He just seemed like he was kind of not really ready to go when the gates opened, dropped farther back than usual. I worry sometimes about horses like this that run so often, losing their early speed, but coming from off the pace in a race like this, probably not the worst thing. I do think he can handle the turf. He would just really need to show up with a good effort. He will be a big price. I mean, the other horse that I want to consider, Craig, is the number 11, Smooth B. I know he's never won on the turf. I think he's 0 for 11 on the turf, but he's run some decent speed figures on the turf. I would say that the race that he ran in 2 back at Saratoga, even though it was an optional claimer, that was a tougher spot than this one. I mean, I would certainly want horses like Artemis City Limits and Big Package, the two that beat him, if they were in this race. And Smooth B, I think he handles the grass just fine. Showed on dirt last time that he's clearly in good form right now. So he's another one that I could use in here, but I would not want to go too deep because I think that there are, I should say TOO, too deep. There were a lot of horses in here that I just think don't fit this race particularly well, and I want to focus on the ones that I think can actually win this spot.
Yeah, I can understand that. I would never knock a single horse anyone picked in this race. I said it was pretty perplexing to me. Um, I just, yeah, I don't know what to do. I'm going to use probably 4 or 5 horses in this one. Well, I'm sure we'll recap it at the end.
Yeah. I should mention there is a horse that I think could take some money in here, the number 2, Surprise Boss, with Irad Ortiz climbing aboard. He's got plenty of competitive speed figures going back to early in the springtime to the middle of the summer. But this was a former Juan Vasquez horse, and most of the Juan Vasquez horses, I should mention Juan Vasquez has been suspended in most racing jurisdictions for a series of issues, including, I think, a drug positive. They've been switched to this guy, Rafael Rohina, who just frankly has not had anything close to the success that Juan Vasquez was having with these same horses. And this horse regressed significantly last time in the Mahoney. I would be very skeptical of a horse like this, especially if he takes the typical Irad Ortiz money.
That's a great point. I did not want to use this horse at all for the reason you mentioned, and I kind of forgot about it talking about the others. But excellent point that, as you mentioned, there's definitely been a significant drop off in the run backs out of the Vasquez barn.
Let's move on to the second leg of this sequence, and it certainly does not get any easier, Craig, as we move on to this Grade 2 Gallant Bob for the 3-year-olds going 6 furlongs on the dirt. It's a full field of 14 runners, and this is just a all-out war because you've got plenty of speed in this race, no real standouts on speed figures or form. I'm not even sure where you're supposed to start in a race like this. I guess the pace projector might be a good place to begin the discussion because there is a lot of speed signed on. I'm not sure that the horses that are shown in front necessarily are going to be the leaders here. I think a lot of it is going to be dependent on the breaks, rider tactics, and trips because in a congested field like this, you need to have some racing luck.
The break will definitely matter because there's a lot of fast horses in here. One of my rules I like to do is I'll look at the race rating in a race like this, and it's a 118 here, and I'll give a little cushion. So I'll just kind of start my handicapping and not pay a whole lot of attention to the horses that can't run at least a 115 speed figure, or at least haven't run a 115 speed figure. And surprisingly, in a 14 horse field, that actually eliminated several in here. There's many who just don't seem fast enough. Maybe, a plotter could get lucky and sit back and run the race of his life if things get really hot up front. But I'm not even sure we have that kind of horse in here. They all seem to have some pretty decent tactical speed. So I'll just start with the one that ran the fastest speed figure, because I'm curious your take on this one. And that would be Running Son of a Gun, who ran a 122 in that Grade 1 Jerkins Memorial at Saratoga, won by Jack Christopher. And personally, I'm a little bit skeptical. I wonder if that was kind of a suck-along speed figure. It's not like he wasn't within shouting distance of Jack Christopher. He did run well, and I'm not going to toss this horse. When you come in with the fastest speed figure, won't be one of the favorites, I wouldn't imagine. But I'm just a little torn on him. I'm wondering what you think.
Yeah, he's a difficult horse to assess in here. I mean, he's kind of been a good horse to have in your trifecta the last couple of times when he went off at 41-1 and 56-1 too back in the Amsterdam, and he's finished third in both of those races. So I wouldn't say that the Jerkins performance was a total fluke, because it's kind of backed up by the Amsterdam that he ran in his prior race. He might just be in great form right now. I don't want to discount that. He is kind of an overachiever. He's a rare son of gun runner that I think sold for just $16,000 as a yearling. He was claimed for $40,000 for these current connections earlier, or I should say late last year on New Year's Eve. And he's just kind of been a revelation as of late, really improving for this bar in John Toscano, who doesn't typically have a lot of stakes horses. So great to see the connections have a good horse. He's going to really have to show up here, and he's going to have to do so cutting back to the 6 furlongs. He's supposed to get plenty of pace to close into, and I think if you're looking for a closer in this race, you have to consider a horse like them, because he's closed against much tougher company than he's facing here. I'm not against him, Craig. It's just a situation where I would want to get a decent price, because a horse like this that was 40-1 and 50-1 and ran these big races, I wouldn't want to take him if he was like the 4-1 lukewarm favorite. I don't think that's going to happen here. He is 6-1 in the morning line. I'm not sure how much stock I'd put in the morning line in this race, because kind of as a pet peeve of mine, if you add up the all the odds and the points, this one adds up to 156, which is kind of a little bit too high, especially speaking from somebody who never puts out a morning line that's above 130. That's a little bit over the edge for me. I think Running Son of a Gun is going to be around that 6-1 to 8-1 range in this race, and if he is, I'm not going to talk anybody off him.
The horse who will be the morning line favorite, I don't really have any knocks on, and that's Provocateur. He's a horse who's done very little wrong this year. He's run first or second every time other than that third to Jack Christopher and the Woody Stevens, and I think we can excuse that when he just got a little tired after being pressed by that one early through a pretty fast fractions. It's kind of an odd race in that we have the half mile coded in blue as slow, and that's just because of how fast Jack Christopher finished, not because he wasn't running fast for him. So I've got no knocks on him. I don't suspect we're going to get 4-1 on him. I think he'll probably get bet a little heavier than that. The next horse on the morning line at 9-2 is Nakatomi, a horse I don't like at all in this spot. He's just never run near fast enough. He's a horse who hasn't done a lot of running in his career. He had a busy 2-year-old season. Then we didn't see him again until June. Now he's had another 3 months off. So he's one of the shorter price horses that I want no parts of.
Yeah, I think talking about Provocateur is an important discussion point in this race, because he's coming out of a big performance in that Jersey Shore at Monmouth. That's kind of a key race for handicapping this Gallant Bob, because I think the first 5 finishers across the wire in the Jersey Shore are all back in this spot. Obviously, Provocateur was best that day, but there were some other things going on in there. The number 8, Witty, who was second, he completely blew the start that day, left the gate about 2 lengths behind the field, so was at a disadvantage from that standpoint, though the Jersey Shore was a race that featured a pretty honest pace up front. I know the TimeformUS pace figures aren't color-coded in red, but it was contested on the lead, and Witty was running on at the end of that race. I do get a little bit concerned that he broke a bit slowly again last time on the stretch out. He's cutting back to a sprint distance, which I think is right for him, but if I'm taking a closer in this race, I just feel like Running Son of a Gun might be a better horse than Witty, so I was a little bit hesitant on him. The horse that I am interested in from the Jersey Shore that finished a little farther back, Craig, would be the number 2 of a Revolution. And I know he doesn't quite fit your speed figure requirement because he's coming in a little bit slower than some others in here, but when I go back and watch that Jersey Shore, he's the one that I thought was compromised a little bit by his trip. He was just sort of in behind some tiring runners coming around the far turn. It's not really noted in the comment line, but he was basically shuffled back at a point in the race when he should have been going forward, just trying to split two tiring horses that were going in the wrong direction. The jockey kind of had to back off a little bit, come around rivals, and he was actually really running on at the end, and I think watching the race would have attained a higher position, arguably second or third, if not for that trouble on the turn. Subsequently, he came back at Charlestown, ran a decent second against a rival that he's going to face again here, but I'm not sure how much stock I want to put in that Charlestown form around 2 turns, cutting back to 6. And Other Revolution has some prior races that I think do give him a chance in here. He's coming in with a pretty strong work tab, putting blinkers on for Safi Joseph, getting Flavian Pratt aboard. I just think that there are some factors that make this horse interesting, and he's one that I could see drifting up a little bit from his 6-1 morning line.
Yeah, he's on my list. He didn't quite make the cut, but the second part of that is then I go for horses that look to be moving towards that number when we're dealing with 3-year-olds like we are here. And he's one of them, so I have no problem with him. I'm a little more interested in the horse that did beat him at Charlestown, A Lot of Hope. He was a horse I remember we talked about on the Pacecast because he won a stakes race at Laurel by just some huge margin and jumped all the way up to a 119 speed figure, and we were wondering how legit that was, but he was able to come back and make a really nice run at Charlestown. You don't see a lot of horses come from the back of the pack at Charlestown like he was able to do. So I don't want to totally dismiss A Lot of Hope either. I kind of like him in here. Just a couple others I wanted to mention were Scaramouche. He's drawn way outside, but he ran a nice race last time, tracking a fast pace here at Parx. He was able to beat Little Vic, who's in the field this time. And I don't want to totally dismiss Little Vic either. He got involved in a really fast pace duel that day. Pace figures early in 136. He was facing pressure, and he actually dug in pretty well to hang in for third. So if he's any kind of price, he's one I'd want to use as well.
Yeah, I was a little skeptical of A Lot of Hope. I thought he got a great pace setup in that Charlestown win last time. We talked about that card quite a bit, Craig, and you were familiar with it being there, but there were a lot of slow paces in those 7 furlong races that night. This was one of the few fast paces, and I think it fell apart a little bit for A Lot of Hope. He's going to get a fast pace again here, so it might be a similar situation, but I don't know. I didn't totally trust his form. I was much more interested in the horse all the way on the outside that you mentioned, the number 14 Scaramouche. Just feels like one that is more of a sprinter, even though he won that mile race 2 back. I liked his performance last time when he beat Little Vic, just kind of ran away from that field with authority at the end. Feels like one that didn't have it all figured out when he tried tougher company in the Bayshore earlier this year behind a horse like Wit. But since then, I think he's improved a bit, and he's drawn outside, which I know it's the 14 hole, but probably not a bad thing to avoid traffic in a field like this. So if John Velasquez can save any kind of ground on this horse, he might be able to work out the right kind of journey. So just to kind of recap for me, I'm most interested in the number 2 of A Revolution, but I respect Provocateur, who I do agree will probably go favored. I think Runnin' Son of a Gun, the number 9, is interesting, a horse that you can definitely use off his recent form, and Scaramouche would be the other horse, the 14, that I would want to have somewhere in my mix. But Craig, it's a race where I definitely have to spread a little bit.
Yeah, there is one more horse that I wanted to bring up, and it's actually because he's run some fast races, and that's Lightning Larry from the 10 hole. He had a little trouble at the start in that Jersey Shore. As you said, it was a pretty solid pace. He was kind of rushed up into it, dueled in between horses, which is something I don't always care for. Kind of got stuck on the turn in between while he was fighting for the lead. So he's one, if you put a line through that race, he fits as well. He's fast. He has an outside post. So I don't want to totally dismiss him either.
Yeah, and he ran a big speed figure too back in that Chick Lang, beating a few rivals that he's meeting again here, was off the layoff last time. So if he can get back to that Chick Lang form, he's definitely dangerous in here as well. Let's move on to the grade 1 portion of this card and sequence. It is the Cotillion race 11 for the 3-year-old fillies. $1 million on the line, going a mile and a 16th on the main track. Craig, I know we've already talked about this race a little bit when we did our DRF videos on the Cotillion and the Pennsylvania Derby. We have a similar take on Secret Oath, who is the horse to beat based on her accomplishments coming in, but I know we're both a little bit concerned that the wheels might be coming off the bus as she heads into the latter portion of her 3-year-old season.
Exactly. She's a horse who speed figure-wise should be improving. She's still a 3-year-old. She's not a likely race 3-year-old by any means. This will already be her 12th start, so she's been running pretty much nonstop since she debuted last October at a regular basis, and you want to see those speed figures take a jump, but she's basically run 4 races in a row, starting with the Kentucky Oaks, all in right about that 115 range. I would have liked to seen some forward progression, and what she faces in this field are some younger horses who have recently run faster, so she's a favorite that I want to try to beat. If she wins, I'm not going to hit the pick 5.
Yeah, I think you have to make some decisions at different points in this sequence. Horses that you want to use, horses that you want to fade a little bit. And for both of us, Secret Oath is a horse that we want to fade, especially if she's anything close to that 2-1 morning line. I just don't think that's particularly good value on her. Craig, there are some horses in this race that definitely have some class questions to answer as they're moving up to a graded stakes event, but have earned some big speed figures in recent starts. And I know we're both interested in 2 of them, me more so in one, you in the other. The one that I think we agree on a little bit is the number 1, Green Up. She is one of 3 Todd Pletcher trained runners in this race, and she is by far the one I want the most of those 3 Pletcher trainees. I know that she hasn't faced this kind of competition yet, but she took a huge step forward in that Catherine Sophia last time to earn a 121 TimeformUS speed figure, and I loved the visual. She was drawing away from that field in a commanding performance, and just going back to watch her races coming into there, she won all of her recent starts with so much ease, and I know it's a step up, but I think this filly might be pretty good.
Right, and she's a horse I even mentioned on their show. I could easily bet 2 horses in here if we were to get the morning line, and she would be one of them. And I think that huge jump's actually a little disguised. It's probably not even the jump that it looks like on paper, where on our figures she went from a 98 to a 121. That prior race was just ridiculous, where she got a final time 104 at Monmouth Park, but the early pace was a 57 to the quarter. There was just no way she was going to run a fast race. But as you mentioned on our preview, if you watch that race, she just looked like a totally different horse than we had seen before, even in those 2 wins. I mean, she does come in on a 4-race winning streak, all by a lot of lengths. I don't think we're going to get 6-1 on here, but I wouldn't be surprised. Secret Oath is going to be favored, so I wouldn't be surprised if we don't get 4-1, 9-2 on her because of her and another horse we're going to talk about, Adair Manor. The other horse I know you're talking about is the outside horse, Society, one that I saw win at Charlestown for Steve Asmussen and ran a huge speed figure that day. And even though that was a sprint, though, I mentioned I don't really think she can't go 2 turns. We've already seen her win at 2 turns at Churchill. Not as fast, but she's another one who's moving forward. She's won 4 out of her 5 career starts. The one loss was to Ness and the Coaching Club of American Oaks, where she basically got left at the gate, kind of had a terrible break, rushed up. The pace was insanely fast that day, 140 pace figures. So she had every right to quit. So I think that race is even a lot better than it looks. So I think she's dangerous as well.
Yeah, I don't dispute that Society is better than her form looks coming into that Charlestown Oaks, and that race certainly signals that she's heading in the right direction. I just feel like her actual performance level is somewhere between that CCA Oaks and Charlestown Oaks form, and I'm not quite sure where it lies. Maybe it's going to be closer to the last performance, and if she runs that again, she's going to be very tough in this race. I'm just a little bit skeptical because she did get away with a moderate pace that day, was able to run right away at the end, has to stretch out now against tougher, but she feels like one that will be close to that 8-1 morning line, Greg. I don't think she's going to get bet down too much like Green Up might. I agree with you. I think Green Up is going to be shorter than 6-1, though. I think that would have been a very generous price on her. I think she's still fair value in the 7-2 or 4-1 range, just given how much I like her in here. You brought up Adair Manor, who is the other horse that could take money in this spot, and she's kind of a difficult one to have an opinion about, Craig, because she's coming off a layoff in here, switching back into the Bob Baffert barn. Her prior two races for Baffert, just before the trainer switch and Baffert's suspension, they were the best races of her career, but she did kind of have favorable circumstances in both of those spots.
She did. She ran big figures. I remember when she obviously wasn't allowed to run in the Kentucky Oaks, but she actually would have had the two fastest speed figures going in had she been in that race. And she couldn't get in because of Bob Baffert, went to the Black Eyed Susan, regressed a little bit, ran second to Interstate Daydream, the Brad Cox horse, who was in really good form at the time. But I have to think something just didn't go right that day, as she's been laid off since. We haven't seen her. I was kind of iffy on her, but she's a horse I definitely want to use in here. I mean, if you're going to toss a favorite like Secret Oath, like I'm going to do, you have to be ready to spread a little bit. And I'm not totally against this horse. And our colleague Marcus Hirsch, he's more of a workout guy than me, and I know you are as well. So maybe you'll have some comment. But she's been working great. I think you mentioned it on the preview, and he actually went so far as to tout her as a distaff filly already, without even seeing her race. So the works must have been pretty impressive. Hopefully I read Marcus's tweet right. He can be a little snarky once in a while, but I don't think that was the case here. I think he actually really liked her. So, yeah, I have to use her as well.
I will say Adair Manor has always been an excellent workhorse. She was impressive in her workouts going back to the springtime. I think that's one of the reasons why she was, odds on in a few of those races before she had really delivered one of these top performances. But her workouts coming into this start are especially impressive. So it's going to be interesting to see if she can really take that step forward, because if she does, off those kind of speed figures that she earned back in the spring, everybody else could be running for second in this race, Craig. She's not my top pick, but I am using her. Green Up would be my A in this race. Adair Manor would be a B for me. And the other B horse that I would want to use somewhere on my tickets, just because I think she's going to be a fair price, is the number 5, Gerrymander. I don't think that the trip and the situation going 10 furlongs last time in the Alabama was exactly right for her. She probably wants to be a bit more forward. I don't think she wanted to rate off that slow pace and just doesn't want to go that far anyway. She probably does have to improve a little bit on her Mother Goose performance too back against what was a weaker field than this, but I think that showed that she does have it in her to be competitive at this level, and she just feels like one that could fly a little bit under the radar here and probably be the best price of the 3 horses that I like, so I do want to use her somewhere.
I can see that. I've got no problem with that. I thought it was a puzzling ride by owning her last time. I did want to mention the horse that finished in front of her last time, Goddess of Fire. She's another one I don't want to totally discount. It would probably come down to just how much I want to spend when I go to structure my ticket. I would prefer Gerrymander to her, actually. But if I could squeeze in one more horse, it would be Goddess of Fire.
Let's move on to the feature race on this Parx Saturday card. It is, of course, the Grade 1 Pennsylvania Derby, going 1 mile and an eighth for the 3-year-olds. And another pretty wide open field, Craig. I think one of the keys to handicapping this race is looking all the way back to the Grade 1 Haskell in June, because the 2 favorites are both coming out of that race. They finished ahead apart, Cyberknife and Taba. We, of course, have seen Cyberknife since then. He was a good second behind Epicenter in the Travers. Taba coming in off a little bit of a layoff. I think the prevailing opinion by a lot of race watchers coming out of that Haskell was that Taba was the better horse just because of the kind of odd trip that he got. But Cyberknife beat him that day in a professional performance. Cyberknife has been improving all throughout the summer, so I don't think it's so cut and dry that Taba is the best horse coming in here.
No, I don't think so either. I think they're pretty even, just like what we saw in the Haskell. I don't think either one is head and shoulders above the other. A lot of people mention the trip that Taba got. I know you've talked about it. He kind of always is that kind of horse where you got to ride him from a long way out. I don't think he's a horse who's going to run very well if you keep him on the inside. I think I remember in the spring hearing that from Bob Baffert, that they wanted him outside in the clear. That's what he did when he romped in the Santa Anita Derby. So he's a tricky horse for me. If you're expecting him to get some ground saving trip, it's not going to happen. He's always going to have to make that long run, get him wound up before you get to the turn, and just get into him for a long time. So while I do think he can win this race here, I certainly think he's going to be overbet because this is a really strong field. I may have gotten a little overexcited on our preview. I said maybe 7 or 8 of the top 10 3-year-olds in here. Maybe it's not quite that many, but it's definitely 7 or 8 of the top 15. This is a really strong field.
It is a strong field, and I agree with what you were saying about Taba. He is a horse that does want to be out in the center of the racetrack. I actually don't think Mike Smith is the best fit for him as a jockey because he's usually not one that will get into a horse as aggressively as some others do. I mean, I think if a Luis Saez or a Manny Franco were on Taba, they'd be a really good fit for a horse like him because he's the kind of horse that needs a lot of encouragement. And, we were talking about the workouts with Adair Manor coming into the Cotillion off a little bit of a layoff. It is the opposite story with Taba coming into this Pennsylvania Derby. His workouts have not been impressive. He has been under an all-out drive to achieve those times that you see published below the PPs. It's not like he's doing it easily, but he's kind of always been that sort of horse. Even going back to the springtime, maybe not to this extent, but he's just always needed to be ridden really hard in the morning. He does not seem like he wants to train. They have to get into him to even complete his workouts. So I'm a little bit skeptical. With a horse like this, I kind of wonder if that lazy tendency eventually catches up with him if it starts to show its face in the afternoon. I think we actually saw a little bit of that in the Haskell last time, and I just kind of get worried that that's going to persist over time. So at what figures to be a short price, because I do think he's going to vie for favoritism in this race, I'm not using Taba. He's going to beat me in this spot, kind of like Secret Oath in the Cotillion. I don't want any part of this favorite. Cyberknife, I could use. I like his versatility. I think he ran well in the Travers last time. He was on the lead that day. I don't think he needs to be in front by any means, so I think he just makes a whole lot of sense in here. Another horse coming out of the Travers, Craig, that I know that neither of us are against is the number 1 Zandon, who didn't get the pace to close into last time, but I could see him getting a better setup from off the pace in this Pennsylvania Derby.
I think he'll get a better setup for sure, and I also think he's probably going to appreciate the turn back from 1.25 miles. Obviously, they had to try him in the Kentucky Derby. I mean, he was coming out of a nice win in the Bluegrass. They had to try the Travers. I mean, it's Chad Brown at Saratoga. He's probably his top 3-year-old. I would assume coming out of it, he definitely is his top 3-year-old, at least going long. But I know we both have questions if he really wants to go that far. And I'm not even sure 1 1/8 is the perfect distance for him, but given the pace and he runs his race every time. He always runs around the same speed figures. And for me, the big thing here is there's no epicenter. That's the horse who just seems to have a hex over him. He's not able to beat him. But when he does it, he beats almost everyone else, save Rich Strike in the Derby, who got that dream trip. He just always seems to run his race. He couldn't quite get to Cyberknife last time, but maybe that furlong less will help him. As to Cyberknife, I was impressed how he held on for second in the Travers. I thought he was really game. He's been that a lot of times in his career. We saw it in the Matt win when he was able to hold on to win by a nose. And he's a horse who's won 5 out of 10 starts, 3 seconds. He's a competitive horse. He seems to want to get to the wire first. So I would never dismiss a horse like him.
Yeah, I think Cyberknife is dangerous, and I like Zandon in this race as well, Craig. I think that you make some really good points about the distance with him. I think the turn back is going to help him. He'd even be the kind of horse that I would kind of have an eye towards the Met Mile next year, because I wonder if he might ultimately be best going that flat 1 mile distance. But for this Pennsylvania Derby, I think that he makes a lot of sense in this race. I do want to talk about a different prep race that is the Grade 3 West Virginia Derby run early in August at Mountaineer Park. A race that came up surprisingly fast, I think, for what was in there. It was over a weird, sloppy track, but they ran a series of routes in a road grade. I know we talked about it a little bit. The speed figure that the winner, Skippy Longstocking, earned and those in behind him, it kind of does make sense compared to the other races that day. And Skippy Longstocking, he might just be the kind of horse that's really improving in the second half of the season.
Yeah, I would agree. And that's in that speed figure. Nobody's really run back out of the Pennsylvania Derby. I think the last place finisher who didn't do any running. But when you look at the race before it, which was for older horses, the West Virginia Governor Stakes, a lot of horses have run back and they've all kind of run to the speed figures they ran that day. So I do think it was a fast race. My one concern is that it was a sloppy track. But Skippy Longstocking's not going to take a ton of money in here, and he comes in as one of the fastest horses. He beat a really solid horse, and We the People, a horse who went off at 7-2 in the Belmont Stakes, a race he probably found a little too far. But We the People had no excuse not to beat Skippy Longstocking at Mountaineer Park. He had the lead to himself. He set a solid but not spectacular pace. The fractions are coded either black as in average or a couple of them in blue as he slowed it down going to the 6 furlongs. And Skippy Longstocking was just able to run right by him. So, of the horses out of that race, I much prefer Skippy Longstocking. I don't really see any way We the People would turn the tables if the good Skippy Longstocking shows up. And why wouldn't he show up? He's shown up basically every single time he's run this year, save his very first race on January 1st.
Yeah, at least from a TimeformUS standpoint, Skippy Longstocking's last two speed figures make him one of the fastest horses in this race. And, Craig, I know you got a little bit of skepticism for the fig that you gave the Belmont Stakes this year. The buyers had it much lower. I think there was almost a 10-point difference between your number and what you'd expect the buyer to be with that, typical 20-point gap. And everybody has run back to the TimeformUS speed figure they ran in the Belmont or gone faster since then. That has been a super key race, and Skippy Longstocking is one of those coming out of the Belmont with a strong speed figure. He more than backed it up last time in the West Virginia Derby, and I just think he's improving. He's come out of that race with a few really strong workouts for Saffie Joseph, and I like him in here. I think he's going to fly a little bit under the radar. He'd be my top pick at what I think will be a better price than Zandon, but they are the two that I would want to use the most in here.
The other one I should mention is Simplification was in that race as well. I don't particularly like him in here, but he is one who will probably take some money. Ran fourth in the Kentucky Derby, had that good Florida campaign, but I wonder if he's not tailing off a little bit. Even if the speed figures don't show it, they should be moving in a forward direction, and they are slightly, but his results seem to be going the opposite way. He's not improving as much as the rest of the crop.
Let's move on to the last leg of this sequence. It is the Pennsylvania bred restricted Alphabet Soup Stakes, going 1.16 miles on the turf course at Parx. And Craig, I do think that the morning line favorite, By Land and Sea, will go favored in here. I'm just not sure that we're going to get anything close to that 5-2.
No, I think you'll be a lot closer to reversing those numbers, as I said on Twitter. Maybe 2-5's an overreach, but I wouldn't be surprised at 4-5 or even 3-5. I mean, she just has a tremendous edge over the rest of this field. She's run against Pennsylvania breds, which this race is, 3 times in her career, and she's won by, I think it's a total of about 20 lengths. And that's on turf. These aren't dirt races. They're all on turf where she just demolishes them. My one concern about her would be that she's on the rail. Maybe she's going to have a target on her back as much the horse to beat, but she has good tactical speed, and she can even go to the lead if she needs to, like she did at Penn last time when she faced Pennsylvania breds. So I'm not overly concerned. In a card that just has a lot of really puzzling races for me, this isn't one of them. It's the one, and that's it.
Yeah, I would also be leaning heavily on By Land and Sea. He has just kept better company in open races in New York recently. Maybe some people might wonder about the trader switch from Tony Dutrow to the Parx-based Guadalupe Preciado. I don't know exactly what the story there is, but this new trainer does fine on the turf if you look up stats and Formulator. And if this horse holds his form, he's just really tough to go against here. I know that his prior victory against Pennsylvania breds at Penn 2-back was over that very boggy turf course, but he's run at Parx in the past and just been utterly dominant on the turf. I mean, he just really does lay over this field. And I think if he, at even money, that's probably a fair price on him. I agree he could go lower than that. Craig, the other horses that are listed short on the morning line, I don't know. I just don't really see them as viable alternatives. I know that the 7 You Must Chill did win this race last year, but there were no by land and seas in that race when he won it. The number 6 Midnight Hauler, I know he's got some decent form against state breds recently, but hasn't been running the kind of speed figures that really put him in the mix. If I were going to use other horses in this race, I would want to use some fuzzier types. I mean, even like the lightly raced number 8 Crisper, who might just be moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I wouldn't be. I'm with you. Like I said, I'm single and I wouldn't use anyone else, but I wouldn't look for those other horses you mentioned because they're just nowhere near as fast. I'd probably try to look for horses who haven't really had the chance to run on the turf as often, but I don't know that we really have any of those in here. So it's one for me where if the favorite doesn't win, I'm probably going to be out. I'm already tossing Secret Oath, so I think there's going to be some value in here, and I just couldn't find any anywhere else. I mean, the outside horses never run on turf, but hasn't really done any running on the dirt either, so that would be a total stab. So, yeah, just a single for me. I just couldn't come up with any, not even logical, even kind of wild stab alternatives.
Yeah, you know me. I'm always reluctant to completely single, and I would have the vast majority of my play going through by land and sea, but the 2 backups that I would use as sea horses would be that number 8 Crisper, who's just lightly raced and improving on the turf, and also the number 5 Vine Jet, who is a big price in this race. First time on the turf here, and I just kind of get the vibe watching his races that he's going to like the turf. He's by Red Vine, who is a local Pennsylvania-based sire who himself did run well on the turf during his racing career, hasn't had that many progeny run on the turf. This dam has produced a turf winner, and just watching this horse's races, he's this very light-framed horse. I'd kind of be surprised if he was more than 900 pounds. Just doesn't look to have a whole lot of strength to him, which you typically would expect of a dirt horse. You'd want to see more of that. And he just kind of looks like one that's going to appreciate the switch to the turf. So at a huge price, he would be one that I would want to use on a deep backup ticket.
Yeah, somehow I missed one that wasn't on the turf before, so I would prefer him to the 10. And they at least tried to get him on it a couple starts ago. It just didn't work out.
Well, Craig, let's do a brief recap of how you might construct this Philly Big 5 ticket. It is a 50-cent minimum, so I think you can feel okay to spread in a few of these races if you do have some stronger opinions later, which I know both Craig and I do.
Yeah, I won't totally toss. That's right. You sold me a little. I think Nothing Better makes a lot of sense. We're talking about the turf monster, obviously. I'm going to use some long shots like Boats Are Rockin' and War Toxin in there. And I'll use Smooth B a little bit. I'll be against Surprise Boss, as you mentioned, coming out of the Vasquez barn. In the Gallant Bob, I definitely am going to use Provocateur, even though he's a favorite. He would be a lukewarm or a high price favorite in a field this big. But I do like some others as well, including a lot of Hope, Scaramouche, Lightning Larry, maybe even a little Vic in here. In the Cotillion, I like the 2 lightly raced horses that are moving up, Green Up, and Society. Totally against Secret Oath in here. Might use a little I will use Gerrymander as a backup and possibly Goddess of Fire. Just depends what kind of ticket I can work out. In the Pennsylvania Derby, I'm going to go with Zandon as my main play. Skippy's long stocking more as an A- B type. I will use Cyberknife a little bit. And I'm torn on whether I'm going to use Taiba at all. I'm leaning towards no. Just going to try to beat the favorites, I think. A horse we didn't mention that I will probably use a little bit, I forgot to bring it up at the time, was Tawny Port. He's a horse who just seems to show up every time, run his race. I thought his race in the Jim Dandy was good. Even though he finished behind Epicenter, it was just by a small margin. And I think he's pretty good, and if he gets a good setup, he's one I would want to have on my tickets as a backup. And then in the last race, I'm just singling by land and sea.
Yeah, Craig and I are pretty similar here. I would focus primarily on That's Right and Nothing Better in leg 1, the turf monster. I would use the number 11 Smooth B. I think he makes some sense based on his turf races. And maybe on a deep ticket, the number 8 War Toxin as a backup at a big price. But I primarily would want the 1, 4, and 11 in the first leg. Moving on to the Gallant Bob. If I had to make a top pick, it'd be the number 2 Over Revolution. Does have to improve, but I think he's heading in the right direction. I would also use the number 3 Provocateur, the number 9 Running Son of a Gun, the number 14 Scaramouche. Craig even talked me into the 10 Lightning Larry a little bit, so definitely a race where I think you want to spread a little bit, especially since I have some stronger opinions coming up in the subsequent legs. I like Green Up quite a bit in the Cotillion. She would be my only A on an ABC kind of ticket. The 2 Adair Manor and the number 5 Gerrymander would be the others that I would want to use in there. In the Pennsylvania Derby, I do like Skippy Longstocking quite a bit. I expect him to offer the best value of the horses that I'm considering in this race, so he would be one that I would lean on. Along with Zandon, he'd be my other main use in here. As backups, I would have a little bit of Cyberknife, even a little bit of We the People, who we didn't talk about too much, but another horse that I think is heading in the right direction coming out of that West Virginia Derby. Taba's not going to be on my tickets. He's just not for me. And then closing things out in that alphabet soup, the only A would be By Land and Sea. Most of my play is going through him. He's the only A, no Bs. And if I have the budget to use a couple Cs, they would be the number 5 Vinejet, that first-time turfer, and the number 8 Crisper.
Yeah, I forgot to mention a couple of 2 horses that I would be using as I was going over that, and it was Of a Revolution and Adair Manor. I don't remember if you mentioned in the beginning, this is normally a jackpot bet, but they're doing a forced payout, and it is a pretty big carryover. I think it was like 150,000, maybe something like that. So it's a pretty good bonus for bettors, and a pool I think is worth taking a shot at.
Yeah, that's a good point and worth hammering home. There was a carryover coming into this mandatory payout on Saturday in the Philly Big 5 at Parx. Well, Craig, hopefully we give out some good handicapping opinions that people can use this weekend. We will, of course, be back next week to recap, especially those Grade 1 events on this card, the Cotillion and the Pennsylvania Derby, as well as any other major racing that catches our eye from around the country when we do the TimeformUS Pacecast. So everybody, thanks for listening this week. Remember, you can always catch these TimeformUS podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for tuning in, and make sure to catch that TimeformUS Pacecast coming up next Tuesday.